The terms race and racialization are often used interchangeably, but they have distinct meanings. Race is a social construct used to classify people into groups based on physical characteristics, such as skin color, hair type, or facial features. Racialization is the process of assigning racial meaning to these physical characteristics. In the United States, race has been used to justify the oppression and exploitation of minority groups. For example, enslaved Africans were racialized as inferior to white Americans, which was used to justify their enslavement. Similarly, Mexican immigrants have been racialized as inferior to white Americans, which has been used to justify their exploitation and discrimination in the past. Racialization is the process of assigning racial meaning to physical characteristics. It is the process of creating race. Racialization is often based on stereotypes and prejudices. For example, Mexican immigrants were often incorrectly racialized as lazy, dishonest, and criminal. The racialization of Mexican immigrants was also justified by scientific racism, which was used to argue that Mexicans were inferior to white Americans. For example, in his 1899 book, The Races of Europe, William Z. Ripley argued that Mexicans were a race of low grade and that they were incapable of self-government. The U.S. Border Patrol was created in 1924 to patrol the northern and southern borders of the United States between ports of entry. However, it was not until the 1930s that the Border Patrol began to focus in enforcement efforts on the southern border, targeting Mexican immigrants. This shift in focus was due to a number of factors, including the Great Depression, which led to an increase of unemployment in the United States. Many Americans blamed Mexican immigrants for taking new jobs away from them, and they demanded that the government do something to stop the flow of Mexican immigration. An explicit example of this during the 1930s, in which the U.S. Border Patrol's mode of tracking relied heavily on racialization. Migra, a study of U.S. Border Patrol by Kelly Lytle Hernandez, includes a quote from a Border Patrol writing that read, "A Mexican always walks heavy on the outside of his feet. When he walks, he puts his foot down on the heels first, and then first rolls it off. Indians will do that too. Whites and blacks ordinarily put their feet down flat." These stereotypes are used to justify the discrimination and violence that Mexican immigrants faced. Hernandez states that the Border Patrol's racialized enforcement practices were not simply a consequence of the Depression and nativism. They were also a product of the agency's own institutional culture, which was deeply rooted in white supremacy. The annexation of Mexican territory following the Mexican-American War led to a large influx of Mexican immigrants into the United States. These immigrants were seen as a threat to the white American way of life, and they were often subjected to violence and discrimination. The racialization of Mexican immigrants has been used to justify a wide range of discriminatory policies and practices, including segregation, disenfranchisement, and labor exploitation. America's origins carry this inherently racist schedule. Chicanx in California, A History of Mexican Americans in the Golden State by Albert M. Camarillo lists a few initial laws that exhibit some examples of racialization in 19th century America, including in 1862, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors passed an ordinance that prohibited Mexicans from owning or renting property in the city, and in 1880, the California Supreme Court ruled in the case of People v. Hall that Mexican immigrants were not citizens of the United States and therefore could not vote. Racialization was essentially being used to erase the Mexican immigrants' sense of identity as well once they entered America. In Occupied America, A History of Chicanx by Rodolfo Acuña, the author states that the racialization of Mexican immigrants has been a central element in the process of Americanization. Despite the challenges they face, Mexican immigrants resisted and challenged their racialization in a number of ways. For example, they formed labor unions and mutual aid societies to advocate for their rights. They also established schools and newspapers to promote Mexican culture and identity. In addition, Mexican immigrants engaged in direct action to protest discrimination and violence. For example, in 1903, Mexican immigrants in El Paso, Texas, organized a boycott of the city streetcar system after a Mexican man was refused service. The boycott lasted for several weeks and resulted in the desegregation of the streetcar system. The racialization of Mexican immigrants is a complex and multifaceted issue. It is rooted in the history of American imperialism and white supremacy, and it has been justified by a variety of factors, including scientific racism, economic competition, and cultural differences. The racialization of Mexican immigrants has had a profound impact on their lives, but Mexican immigrants have also resisted and challenged this racialization. The racialization of Mexican immigrants is not a relic of the past. It continues to shape the experiences of Mexican Americans today.